So let's go ahead and set up the game mode and player controller. So over here in the blueprints folder, right click and click on blueprint class. And let's choose the player controller. It doesn't matter what you choose first. Let's just create the player controller and call it PC. And let's just call it the name of the game. So Death Collector. And right click, create a blueprint class, and let's create the game mode. And remember, the player controller is an actor responsible for controlling a pawn used by the player. So we will use it to control the character we are creating in a bit. And the game mode is defining the rules of the game, the scoring, and so on. So create a game mode, call it GM Death Collector. So now we have a game mode and a player controller. In order to use this game mode and the player controller, these are the custom ones. Let's go ahead in the edit and the project settings. And inside of here, we have something called maps and modes. So inside of here, we have the default game mode, and we have to change this to the custom one we just made, the GM Death Collector. This is our game mode. Click on the arrow here on the selected game mode, and you will see all of these classes. In the default pawn, we don't really have a default pawn yet. We will create it in a bit, but we have a player controller. So let's change this one to the PC Death Collector, which is our custom player controller. Let's close it down. And just to make sure, go inside of the game mode here. And inside of the game mode, just check here to the right that the player controller is actually the PC Death Collector, and this is correct. So this is fine. Let's close it. And inside of the world settings to the right here, so click on the world settings. You also have to change it to the map. So remember, click on the map you want to change it for. So let's start with the map Underworld. Here in the world settings, change the game mode to GM Death Collector. And just make sure that the player controller is PC Death Collector. So this is correct. Let's click on the map end. Click on the world settings. Change the game mode to GM Death Collector and PC Death Collector. So remember, this is a mistake that many makes. You will get confused why your game is not working the way you want it to, and this is because maybe you forgot to actually assign the game mode. So remember to assign the game mode. And let's go ahead and open up the player controller. I just want to see if we have to do anything here. And this is looking fine. So let's close it again. Let me click on the game mode. And you can click here to open the full editor. And this is because the blueprint class is empty. This is why this is going to be full screen. So click on open full blueprint editor and it will open up like before. And I just want to see if I need to edit something here. And it also looks fine. So let's close it down. And this is fine for now. We will always go back and do some changes when we need to. So let's try to set up the character pawn now. Okay, hello and welcome to this game project. So before we go ahead and do anything, please go ahead and download this project that I have uploaded to the site. So go ahead and download it. It's called Death Collector. And what you will see is a folder, and inside of it is all of the project. Here you can see what it looks like, and this is what you will be downloading. And when you extract it, you can open up the deathcollector.u project. And also, if you don't want to open it through here, you can open it through the Epic Games Launcher. When you launch Unreal Engine 5, inside of there in the project, you can browse to this .u project file and go ahead and open it up. Please let me know if you have any trouble opening it up. I hope not. And when you open up the project, you see all of these things. So remember, when you open a project, usually you are inside of an empty level. So you have to double click on one of the maps to enter a level. Okay, so this is something to know. And inside of this project, there are these folders over here. So we have a 3D folder, and inside of the 3D folder, we have all of these assets. So these assets is what's used to create this level. And also I've just created a quick level that we can use for our game, but you can go ahead and create a better looking level if you want to. These are assets that you can just click and drag and drop here. I've already added the materials and textures and all of that, so you don't have to think about it. You can go ahead and drag assets and design your own level if you want to. So these are all assets that is created for my game Boardcraft, and I directed this game, and we created a lot of assets. We created assets for, I think, about 10 months. I created a lot of things, so this is only part of it. These are only some smaller assets of the game, and we are going to use those to create our own small game. And these artists creating these assets are very talented, so this was really cool to work on. And apart from these 3D assets, we also have audio, and I just inserted 2 different SFX. And we have blueprints. I just created some lighting blueprints, so you can see here if we drag it out, we have a light that we can place around. And I'll show you how to create these as well, and we are also going to create other blueprints here. We have maps. We have the underworld map, which is this current map that we are in, and we have the end map, which is this map that we are in when we finish the game. And we have these marketplace assets, which are for free, and we have this candle visual effects, which is just this candle lighting. Okay, so before we start, I just want to explain to you what this game is about. And what this game is about is you are a small ball, and this ball you can control with WASD or the arrows on your keyboard. And this ball is just rolling around, collecting all the coins in the level. And then when you're finished collecting the coins, you go inside of this portal, which will then finish the game, and you will end up in this ending screen. So you learn how to create the coins, loot the coins, go over and change levels, and do the ending screen. And depending on if you have gotten all the coins or how many coins you have gotten, you are going to get different trophies. So we have here a bronze trophy, we have a silver trophy, and then we have a gold trophy. So you are getting one of those trophies. And here we also have a platform which we can place the trophy on, and this will be a cool game. So very simple, just collecting coins. Depending on how many coins you have collected, you'll get a trophy, and here you end the game with your character. So this will be perfect for our first game, nothing too complex, but we will still learn a lot. And it is very cool that we before learned all the fundamentals of programming, but it is also cooler to put everything together and try to use it, because sometimes it's confusing when we just used print string, and sometimes it's harder to imagine how to put all of these things together that you've learned into creating a whole game. Okay, so enough talking about the game. Let's go over to the next lesson and actually start doing the project. Hello and welcome to this section. So this section will focus on creating your first game. And for this one, we're just creating a very simple game as your first game to see how we use all the things that we've learned and put them together into making a game. So what we're going to make is just a simple sphere that you can control with your keyboard. And you're going to loot scrolls. And these scrolls will be displayed up in the top left corner. You can see how many scrolls I've looted, and when I'm finished looting the scrolls, I can enter my portal, and from here it's going to display to you what kind of trophy you have. If you haven't looted many trophies, you're going to get the bronze trophy. If you have looted in the middle, you're getting the silver, and if you have looted all of the trophies or all of the scrolls, you're getting the gold trophy. So this is a very simple game, but you're going to learn some things and how to put all the things together that we've learned. And from there, we can move to more advanced topics. So let's go ahead and start the game project. Hello and welcome back to this last one in the Blueprint communication. And this one is about event dispatchers. So this one is a bit different from Blueprint interfaces. The event dispatchers focuses more on firing multiple events. And you can fire one event, you can fire multiple events. And the cool thing is you can also communicate with the level blueprint over here. And instead of explaining it, let's go ahead and do an example with an event dispatcher. So here in the blueprints, I want to create a new class, and this one. And let's say I want to create an actor, and let's create the barrel. So we want to spawn the barrel at a certain time. So we have this barrel. We can add a component cylinder like we did before. Okay, just like this. Now we have this barrel. And here we also want to create a player controller. So right click, blueprint class, and create a player controller. And for player controllers, I usually call them PC. And let's just call it player controller. Okay, so inside of this player controller, the idea we want to do is when you press the E key on the keyboard, you gain coins. And when you gain enough coins, you will spawn this barrel in the map. Okay, and we want to do it through an event dispatcher. So going inside of the player controller, and we don't do anything in here. Let's go over to the event graph. I want to delete these events. And let's write E keyboard. Okay, so now we have this E key. And we want to gain coins when we press E. So let's make a variable, call it coins. And this one is an integer because coins doesn't really have decimal places. That doesn't make sense unless your game has. So integer, we just want ordinary coins. And when you press the E key, we want to plus by 1 coin. Okay. So when we press the E key, we want to plus by 1 coin. And when we have enough coins, we want to spawn the barrel. And we want to do that logic inside of the level blueprint. So let's go over and open the level blueprint. Remember to be inside of this map tutorial. Okay. And in the level blueprint, let's go over and say begin play. And what we want to do, we want to call to the dispatcher. So now let's create the dispatcher and also come back to this level blueprint. So over here, we want to create an event dispatcher. Okay, so create on this plus to make an event dispatcher, and we can call it barrel spawner. Okay, so this event dispatcher we can compile, and to the right, you can see we have something called inputs, and we can add a parameter. So let's go ahead and do that. Click on new parameter. And for here, we want to add these coins. So I can drag it out and you can see what it looks like. And if you drag it out, you can see you can call it, you can bind it, unbind it, and event and assign. And this is what it is. You have to call this dispatcher. This is just like calling this function or doing it with the user interfaces. This is what you do with event dispatchers. You call it, okay? And you connect it just like any other function. Okay, so now we are calling this event dispatcher. And let me go ahead and do this correctly with the variable over here. So if you click on the event dispatcher down here, let's change the variable to integer because we want this coin value. And we can just call it coins. Compile and save. And let's actually delete this one and drag it out and call again. So it's correct. And let's connect this integer result inside of coins. Okay, so now we have called this event dispatcher, just like when you call events, okay? Just like when you call events normally. So now we have this event dispatcher, and let's go over to the tutorial or the level blueprint. And here we want to access this event dispatcher. And remember, if we want to access anything inside of this custom blueprint class, we have to either cast to it or use blueprint interfaces. So for this one, I can show you how to do both just for practice. If you want to cast to it, you can say get player controller, because remember the parent class is the player controller, and this is the general player controller, but here you want to cast to your own custom player controller. So write cast to, and you find this player controller, and from here you can then call the event dispatcher. And when you want to call to an event dispatcher, you have to bind it. This is what it's called. You bind to the event dispatcher. So you write bind to, and then you write the name of the event dispatcher. In this case, for us, we called it barrel spawner, and you can see here it says bind event to barrel spawner. I'll explain this one in a little bit. Let's go ahead and see how we can do this inside of a Blueprint interface instead of casting. So you have the two options just for practice. And let me delete this again. And let me go over and make a Blueprint interface. Firstly, we have to get a reference to this player controller. So the way we do it is, let's go over in the blueprints, create a new folder, call it interfaces. Inside of this, let's make a new interface inside of blueprints and blueprint interface. Let's call it int player controller. And let's double click, and inside of here, let's make a new function called set player controller ref. And you can call it whatever you want. Okay, and we want a reference to this player controller. So let me show you here. In the player controller, remember we have to add interfaces to classes, else they will not work. So inside of the class settings, you have to, down here in the interfaces, you have to add the int player controller we just made. And when you do it, you can see here our interface function appears. Okay, remember this is an event if we only have inputs. So now this is an event. We can't really double click it as a function. So we want to reference the player controller. So let's add an output. And inside of the outputs, let's do the player controller we have here. This is the reference we want. PC player controller. And this is an object reference. Okay, and here we can call it player controller. Compile and save. And you can't do anything in here. So this is all finished. Let's go back to the player controller. And now you can see it's become blue because now we have an output and it's not an event anymore. We can double click it and now we can just write self. So we are referencing, it's asking what player controller is this reference. This is self because we are inside of this one, okay? So the reference is this one. This is how you do it. And now what we can do in the level blueprint, we can actually here, instead of casting, let's copy this get player controller. And now we can say the function we just made. So set player controller ref. And remember, since it's a interface function, it has to say message, okay? And it's also shows through this letter icon that it's a interface function. So just like before, now what we can do is bind to barrel spawner. So this is how you call event dispatchers. You bind to them. So let's delete this casting. Let's just use the player controller or the interface function we just made, and let's connect everything. Okay, so when you create event dispatchers, you call them just like an ordinary event. You just like functions, you just call them just like that normally. And when you call them, when you use them in other places, you have to bind to them. And what you need to do is you have to reference to the place where you made the event dispatcher. In this case, we are referencing to the player controller because this is here where we made it, okay? And you have to bind to it. And now we have an event here. So here, let's create a custom event. And let's call it spawn barrel. Okay, let's compile and save. And now every time we level up, every time we press E, we are going to gain coin. And every time we gain a coin, it's going to call this barrel spawner. And when you call the event dispatcher, it's going to fire all the events that you have bounded to. So when I press E and I gain a coin, it's actually going to fire this event. And you can do this in many blueprints. You can imagine that you have 10 places where you bind to this barrel spawner, to this event dispatcher, and every time you call it, it's going to fire in all the places you have bounded to, okay? So here what we want to do, now we have this input called coins, and this coins is actually coming from here. So every time we press E, it's going to give us one more coin, and it's going to put it inside of this event dispatcher. And now we can see we have this coin that we add here. And what we want to do is just ask, is this number greater or equal to 10. So if we have 10 coins, is this true? If it is, we can go ahead and do spawn actor from class. We can spawn the barrel. And the place we want to spawn it, let's promote this to a variable and call it barrel transform. And let's compile and save, and let's spawn it in the middle of the map and just give it 15 so it's not beneath the ground. And we can say try to adjust location but always spawn. And let's save. And before we click play, remember this is a custom player controller and we have to assign something here, but remember we don't really have a game mode. And for this, let's just go ahead and create a game mode. So inside of here, do a blueprint class, create a game mode, and let's call it GM game mode. Okay, now we have a game mode. Let's save everything. And inside of the world settings, let's change the default game mode to game mode. And you can then assign a player controller. And here we want to assign the PC player controller. And now we are using our custom game mode, and it's also using the custom player controller. So let's save everything. And let's see what happens. Click play, and when you press the E key, and actually let's print out to the screen so you can see it better, else you won't really visualize it. So when you add coins, I also want to let us print a string before we do this. So print a string, and this one you can try to use reroute nodes, and you can do this by double clicking on the strand here. And here we want to say we just want to print out the amount of coins that you have currently. And actually, yeah, let's do it like this. That's fine. Just like that. Okay, now it's going to print the amount just so we can see it. And if we click play and press the E key, it says 1, then it says 2. And when you get up to the number 10, it should spawn the barrel. And you can see here, now we have spawned this barrel. So what happens is, let's go through it quickly. What happens is we created this event dispatcher. And for event dispatchers, you call them just like when you take out a function and you want to use that function, or when you call the custom events that you make. Okay, so now we call this event dispatcher just like you call events normally. And for this event dispatcher, we added a parameter, and this is because we want to get affected by these coins. This is what's affecting. And these coins over here, to call this event dispatcher, you have to bind to it, and you just write bind to and then the name of the dispatcher that you made. And remember, you had to reference to the place you made the event dispatcher. So in this case, it was in the player controller. And here in the player controller, we can then take out and bind to the event dispatcher. And every time you call the event dispatcher, every time you press E and call it, it is going to fire on all the places you have bounded to. So in this case, we have only bounded to one event. So it's bound to this event. So this event is going to fire every time we press E. But it's only going to do something because we had added this condition that if we have 10 or above coins, then go ahead and spawn the barrel. And just to show you that it's firing all the time, we can just say fire down here. So if we don't have 10 coins yet, it's going to say fire. And if we click play and I click E, it says fire, 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 fire. So it's going to fire this event all the time, every time you press E, because you have called this event dispatcher and it's going to fire everywhere you have bounded to. This is very useful, especially if you bind it in many places. You can imagine you can fire many events at once. And this is also a cool way to communicate with the level blueprint. This is how you use event dispatchers, and please let me know if you have any questions about it. Blueprint communication is usually a bit more difficult for beginners, but if you have a good understanding of how it works, then everything will be a lot easier to understand. So let's go over in the next section and actually develop an actual game. So far we have just used the print string in a lot of videos, and while it's cool to display all the things through a print string, it usually tends to get harder when you try to develop an actual game, because it's fine, I printed a string, but how do I use it actually when I program a game? And this is what we're going to look at. We're going to program a game from scratch, and I'll show you the process of how to start from scratch and then build up a game that's actually functional and making a win condition and all of that. So let's go ahead in the next section and develop our first game. Okay, so now let's talk about the blueprint interfaces. And this is what I mainly use when I program my games. And the reason is that casting, when you do cast to other blueprints, this is actually creating a hard reference. And when you create too many hard references, for example, if this blueprint casts to this blueprint, which again casts to the other blueprints, and you keep casting and casting and casting, at the end it's going to affect performance, because this is hard referencing and you are going to load all of these casts before you do the thing you want to do. So in order to do this, also when you use blueprint interfaces, it's a lot more cleaner on your code. So it's not only the hard references, but your code is so much clean. So I recommend you learn this right from the beginning before you program anything, because this is so important for you to learn. And let's go ahead and see what blueprint interfaces are. So before we create a blueprint interface, let's go ahead and create a blueprint class. Let's make the barrel we had before. Let's call it BP barrel. And let me go ahead and create this component, a cylinder. And I'm going to create the barrel that we had before. Okay, so now I have this barrel. And again, let's go over to the blueprint, level blueprint, and let's also open this barrel. So what I want to do is, here it can just say in the begin play, it can print a string and say, I have spawned. Okay, and this lasts for 10 seconds. And what we want to do inside of the level blueprint, here we actually want to spawn this barrel. Okay, and so we need some spawning logic. So let's go ahead and create the game mode again. Right click, blueprint class, and create the game mode here. And let's call it GM game mode. Let's go inside of this game mode, and just like before, let's create a custom event. And this one is going to be called spawn barrel. And let's go ahead and do the spawn actor from class. Choose the barrel and make transform. And here we are going to write 15, so it's above the ground. So now we have this spawning logic for the barrel. Now we need to call this event for it to work. So we are going back in the level blueprint and we want to call it here. So in the begin play, when we start playing the game, we are, let's delay it by 2 seconds or 3 seconds so we have a chance to see it. And let's call this event. So remember before, when we had to access it, we wrote get game mode, and then we wrote cast to GM game mode. This is what we did before. This was casting, and here we could say spawn barrel. But now this is not what we want. We're trying not to do hard referencing for now. I actually never use casting unless I have to, like, there are some situations you don't want to go to the hassle and make a blueprint interface. If you're only going to cast once, that's all right. It's not because you're not allowed to use casting. Just be careful not to spam it everywhere. Okay, so instead of using casting, we want to do a blueprint interface. So to create a blueprint interface, I'm actually going to create a new folder inside of blueprints, and I usually call it interfaces. And inside of here, I can right click, and inside of blueprints, there's something called blueprint interface. Okay, and this is pretty cool. So far we have learned about blueprint classes, the library, function library, macro library, and enumeration, and now we're learning about blueprint interfaces. So you almost have all of these, you only need the structure left. So let's do the blueprint interface, and for interfaces I usually call them int and then give it a name, and for this case I want to call it game mode, and you will see why I call it game mode, because this is the interface for the game mode we actually created here. Okay, so if you double click this blueprint interface, you see here we have now this viewport over here. This looks like the event graph, and we have a lot of functions. So here in the blueprint interface, you create functions, and these functions you use in other blueprints. So this is like a function holder. Okay, and this is the blueprint interface is specific for blueprints. So I'll show you how you attach those. Okay, so let's try to, instead of doing the casting, we actually want to avoid casting, and we want to reference this game mode without doing casting. So how do we do this? First off, inside of the game mode here in the interface, game mode interface, we are going to make a new function called set game mode ref. And this is like setting the game mode reference, okay? You can call it whatever you want, but this makes sense for me, set game mode ref. Okay, so this function is specified to set the game mode reference. And here in the output, we are going to add a variable, okay? And this one, you can actually write game mode. And you can see here, I can find my GM game mode. This is the game mode class that we made here. Okay, so we want a reference to this game mode class. So write game mode and find the one called GM game mode. This is our game mode, and this should be an object reference. And let's call it game mode. Okay, so this is a variable. This is just like creating a boolean or an integer, but here the variable is our game mode class. Okay, let's compile and save, and I'll show you how we can access this. So inside of the game mode, the class that we made here, we have to go inside of here, and inside of the you have something called class settings, and you have something called class defaults. Okay, so inside of the class settings, you have something called interfaces. You have to add the interface to a blueprint before it can work. So right now this interface is not attached to the game mode, and therefore it will not show anything. We have to attach it to the blueprint we want to use it in. And in this case, we want to use it inside of the game mode. So here we click on the add and we search for the interface, so int. And this is why it's so good to write names before the actual name. So click on the int game mode, and now we have added it. Remember to compile for it to work. Compile, save. And you can see here to the left something appears. This is the interface. So now in the interfaces, all of the functions you make here will appear here. Okay, so now you can double click on this game mode or this function you made. You can see here, this is actually the function you made here. You can't do anything here. You can't add stuff here. This is just the interface. You can only create the function, and you can use the function inside of this blueprint when you add it to the class setting. So remember, a lot of people make the mistake of forgetting to add the interface here. So remember to add it, and after that you can actually access the function. And here we can see the reference or the variable game mode. And the way we reference this, we can actually just write self. So we are going to say the game mode. What is this reference? So what is this game mode reference? And this is self, because self, we are inside of the GM game mode. And remember, this variable is GM game mode. So this is actually self. This is itself that it's referencing. And now this is very cool. So now I'll show you what the actual result is. Inside of the level blueprint that we were in, instead of doing the get game mode and then casting, we can actually now access this this interface function here. So going back to the level blueprint, we can say set game mode ref, and you can see here we have set game mode ref, and it's very important that it says message. This means that this is the interface. If it does not say message, this is wrong. Okay, so remember to read that it says message, and there should be a letter icon up here. So this means this is from an interface. And if we hook it up, now we have a reference to this game mode, because this game mode, we have referenced it to self. So it knows that this game mode here is actually this game mode, this custom game mode we made. If you didn't hook up anything here, it wouldn't really know what this variable was. So self means this game mode is actually this game mode we are in. And as this game mode, we can do the spawn barrel. Okay, so we can do spawn barrel. So this is how you work with Blueprint interfaces. So now we didn't cast, and this is pretty cool. And you can see the code also becomes a lot cleaner. So if we save everything, remember to compile, and let's click play and see what happens. We have to go inside of the world settings and set the GM game mode, which is our custom game mode. And let's try to play again. And you can see here, after 3 seconds, it spawns our barrel. Okay, so now we actually spawned the barrel without doing the casting. So let's go back, and I'll explain it one more time just quickly. So what we did is we created this Blueprint interface. So this is our Blueprint interface here. And you have to attach Blueprint interfaces through the class settings. So I could have added it here if it made sense, but this was only created for the game mode, so it only makes sense to add it here to the game mode. And when we add it, we can access the interface functions. And inside of this function we actually just wanted to reference this game mode. So we added a variable, and the variable was this GM game mode. So inside of GM game mode, we access this interface we made, and we have to specify to it what is this variable. This is self, because we are already in GM game mode. So this is how you can reference to. And inside of the level blueprint, we can then get the game mode. This is the general parent game mode up here. And we can call then the set game mode ref. So you can actually access now these blueprint interface functions. And then you can call the spawn barrel, because we already know that this game mode, we have referenced it as self over here, so it knows that you mean GM game mode over here. Now let me show you another cool thing before we end the video. Over here in the game mode, instead of doing a spawn barrel custom event, I will show you how to do an event through the interface. So here I'm going to delete this spawn barrel, okay? And I'm going back to the interface, and I'm going to add a function and call it spawn barrel. Okay, and the important thing to know here is if you create an output, if you double click this set game mode ref, if you click an output like a return node, this will be a function. Okay, so this will be a function, and it will be blue, and you can see it here. However, if you make a function without an output, so it is only the input here, it will be an event, and this will be yellow. So events are yellow, okay? And it will be an event if you don't have an output. However, if you have an output, a return node, it will not be an event. It will be a normal function that you can access. However, if it's an event, it means that you only have an input here, and you can't double click and access it, because this is an event. So we have an event called spawn barrel, and we can actually go to the game mode here and write spawn barrel, because you can't drag out here. It says error, you can't drag out. So you have to write spawn barrel. And what you are looking for is this event spawn barrel, because you need the event. So event spawn barrel, and you can see here this icon means this is from an interface. So now you can use this here and plug it in. Okay, so now you have an event using the Blueprint interface. And the reason why we can call it is because we have added it to the class settings. So it knows all of these functions we add here. So you can use them here. And this is a lot cleaner that you can add all of the functions here and then use them. And the way we call them now, we're getting an error because this is not the custom event anymore. We need to change it. This is now the Blueprint interface event. And this one is called spawn barrel. So we're going to write spawn barrel. And the one we need to choose is, remember, it's this message. So this is from the Blueprint interface. So spawn barrel, we're going to call this one. So what we are going to do is we're getting the game mode. We're getting the reference, which is referencing to this GM game mode that we made. And from here, we are calling this Blueprint interface, which is the event that we made inside of the interface over here. So we made the spawn barrel. Okay. So this is pretty cool. So let's click play and see what happens. And after 3 seconds, it should spawn this barrel, which it also does. So this makes the code a lot cleaner, and you will see also more clearly when we make our game, because I will use Blueprint interfaces so we can practice. And also remember that you can add inputs to these events. So for example, let's say you needed this spawn transform inside of this event. You could actually go in here in the spawn barrel and you could add an input and call it spawn transform. Actually make this a little bit bigger so you can see what's in there. So I can call it spawn transform and I can make it into a transform variable and I compile. And if you go back to the game mode, you can actually see now we have a transform. And we could, for example, have plugged it into here. But right now, this doesn't make sense because we aren't referencing it here. So you can see here, if I compile and save and go back to the blueprint, the level blueprint, you can actually do it that way, and you could add a transform here. And let's say we wanted to, for example, get where the actor is standing. For example, if you had a character, I would get the character's position and I would plug it in. And when I plug a position in here, let's just promote to a variable, and you can see. So this variable over here is going to go ahead and put this input inside of this inside of this event or this function over here, and it will go through to here and it will put the whatever you added in this variable, it will be added to this spawn actor. Alright, so this was it for the blueprint interfaces, and we will use it a lot more when we create our first game. And before we create our game, let's go ahead and learn about the last thing, which is the event dispatchers.